My name is John Richardson-Lauve. I am the Senior Director of Community Outreach at St. Joseph's Villa here in town. St. Joseph's Villa is the oldest continually operating nonprofit serving children in the country. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and for the purposes of today, my specialty is trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed care is something I've been training on for the past 8, maybe 10 years now. And I've had the good fortune to train on this topic all around. I've worked with half the school systems in the state of Virginia, worked with the Virginia Department of Health, the National Resilience Institute. I have an annual gig that I go up with the FBI, and I work with agents and victim advocates who work with child victimization crimes to help them understand how, when you experience what we call chronic toxic stress or trauma, and how that influences how the brain gets wired up and how that influences how we behave. You're welcome to share this out in terms of your e-blasts or whatever, but this link here, this URL, or this QR code, it'll be in the last slide too. We're going to do this again next Wednesday. This is only a part 1. That'll take you to a Google Drive folder with this whole PowerPoint, and then I'll be throwing in some other resources as we move along, depending on what we talk about. If you want to interrupt me, if you want to interact, if you have questions, feel free to ask, feel free to interact, feel free to interrupt me anytime. For the Virginia Birth Injury Fund, this is a project that, to my understanding, is something that's been long in coming in helping you all kind of understand this world of trauma-informed care and how it impacts the work that you do. Because you're meeting people at critical moments of their lives. And they're dealing with all sorts of horrible bad things and all sorts of trauma, which we're going to define in a bit. And that's going to impact how they show up. But as we talk about the stuff today and next week in part 2 or 16th, I think, this is not just about the people that you serve. This is not just the people who are dealing with birth injury. This is all of what we're talking about today is about people. It's about you. It's about me. It's about the people that you're going home to tonight. It's about your family, your loved ones, your community. It's really an everybody thing. And we're going to talk about it in the context of birth injury and family issues. But this is really a much more global thing. Any questions as we get going? All right. Do this up. All right. Quick brainstorm, because we're going to be talking about some bad things. We're going to be talking about bad things that happen to people and trying to put that in the context of strength. Unfortunately, one of the things I really don't like about doing a part 1 and a part 2 of this is we're going to leave today having talked about a lot of bad things, but not having a lot of time to get to the good stuff. Okay. So I'm going to do what I can to help protect you, take care of you. But as we talk about bad things that happen to people, I'm not going to pretend like this is the first time you've ever heard that bad things happen to people, but do what you need to do to take care of yourself. You have my contact information, happy to give you a business card. If you need to chat afterwards, happy to do that, happy to support you. If you need to get up and walk out and go get some fresh air, clear your head, whatever, absolutely fine. If you need to chat with me after we finish, whatever. Make sure you're doing what you need to do to take care of yourself. But to start off, I'm pretty interactive. I'm never going to demand anything of you today, but I'm going to invite you to help preload your nervous system with some positive energy. So think about who or what uplifts you, who or what gives you strength, who or what helps you get through hard times. Whether that's when you're dealing with somebody on the phone who's yelling and hollering at you because you haven't written the check for them yet, or some claim has been denied, or whether that's because you're dealing with traffic on your way home. And that's getting on your nerves. I'd love to invite a few people to share how you would answer this question. Really, it's just 3 ways to ask the same question. Who or what uplifts you? Who or what gives you strength? Who or what helps you get through hard times?
Loved ones.
Say again?
Loved ones.
Loved ones. Anyone in particular?
Husband.
Husband. Good.
Kids.
Your kids. Awesome. How many you got?
2.
2. Awesome. Wages?
1, I got a 3-year-old.
Okay.
One might be 2 months.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome.
I thought you said wages. I thought you
Oh, yes. I bubbled.
How much you spend in kids?
You have it now?
Sports. Djokovic plays at 2 o'clock on the
Okay.
tennis channel.
Nice. Nice. So watching sports?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Maybe 2 more. Pets. Awesome. How many people would say pets? How many people would say spouse or partner? How many people would say children? Good. But sometimes your kids are not on your good side. Sometimes your partner might not be on your good side. So it's important to have a lot of different answers to this. Anybody else want to share? Friends, coworkers. Awesome. And I won't ask you to point out which one's your favorite.
I never stay here, so.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. There's a chair over here. Want to come in?
There's one here.
Over there. So I get to talk to a lot of different people about this topic. This weekend on Saturday, I'll be doing a keynote at an early childhood educator conference for the state of Virginia. And when I talk to people who are taking care of the little babies, like I don't have to do much to convince them that when bad things happen, our kids get hurt. We don't want our kids to feel hurt. But I got a lot of different audiences I got to talk to. So I love this Martin Luther King quote when we're talking about trauma-informed care. And this Martin Luther King quote, he said this in 1967 in an interview with NBC News. And it's recorded. It's on YouTube. You can find it pretty easily. And what Martin Luther King, in this quote, I'll paraphrase it for you. He said, "It's a fine thing to tell a person to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. What's a cruel jest is to tell a bootless person to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps." He said this in 1967 about a portion of our society that had been historically marginalized, segregated, disenfranchised, and for a period enslaved. And it was people who looked a little bit more like me, who were saying, we don't need special programs for these people. They just need to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. They just need to get over it. They just need to get with the program. Part of being trauma informed is looking through a lens and trying to figure out if people have boots on in the first place. What do they need from me right now? I'm not going to pretend like any of you that your job, as far as I know you're looking to expand your care team, but the job of the majority of you is not to be a social worker, is not to be a counselor or a therapist. And I totally acknowledge that. But we still bring into those interactions our humanity. And part of that is trying to understand if people have boots on in the first place. Work with a lot of educators, and I think this is a great way, even though you're not directly school people. I really love this poem. Joshua Dickerson is a motivational speaker, a poet, spoken word artist out of Atlanta, Georgia. To think about this in the context of your work, in the context of your day, people that you know. I woke myself up because we ain't got an alarm clock. Dug in the dirty clothes basket because ain't nobody washed my uniform. Brushed my hair and teeth in the dark because the lights ain't on. I even got my baby sister ready because my mama wasn't home. I got us both to school on time to eat us a good breakfast. And then when I got to class, the teacher fussed at me because I ain't got a pencil. Thoughts? Very sad. Excuses. Tell me more about that.
Just looks like everything is accompanied with an excuse. This could have happened, but
okay.
So just a lot of excuses is what I see. But I mean,
okay.
I'm sure it's things with it, I guess. But at the end of the day, it is a lot of excuses and not a whole lot of accountability as to what you can control.
Okay. And we don't know if this is an 8-year-old or if this is a 6-year-old or if this is a 16-year-old.
Don't know.
I think it's.
But the first that it says about the baby sister getting the sister ready and then getting to school on time because there's no breakfast. In other words, at home kind of sounds to me like there's a lot of neglect. There's a child, regardless whether they're 16 or 8 years old, kind of doing things that there should be obviously an adult at home doing.
I think it's more, he's getting knocked for doing something minor that could be fixed when he did all these huge things to get there. It's like, no one's recognizing all he had to do to get to school.
Yeah.
And he's being nailed because he forgot a pencil.
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, this kid's a rock star for showing up in class, right? Dealing with a whole lot more than what most of us have to deal with. What's important to remember here is this teacher doesn't have the ability to be a mind reader. Based on what we know here, may or may not know anything about what this kid deals with in terms of struggle on a daily basis. And importantly, this kid has no obligation to tell their story. What's the likelihood that out of the 18, 20 of us in this room, that somebody had a really crappy morning?
I can tell you who it is.
What's the likelihood? I hope not. But what's the likelihood that somebody in this room is going through a breakup right now? What's the likelihood, again, I hope not, that somebody in this room has a loved one in the hospital? And you're in here paying attention to me. You only got to deal with me for like an hour, but maybe you're over there and you're doodling on your phone, every 2 or 3 minutes during my workshop. And I don't know what you're dealing with. And if all I get to do is see that, a student in my class not paying attention, then I might make assumptions, right? And you might be checking to see if the diagnosis is cancer or not. And that is more important than what's going on up here. The hardest thing I'll say today, we have to have empathy and compassion even for the stories that we don't get to hear. It is easy to have empathy and compassion when we get to hear a story, right? You know, you tell me you got that loved one in the hospital or whatever that's going on, my heart's going to go out to you. But when we don't know all this and all we get to see is somebody showing up unprepared, then we criticize them. We give them a hard time. Again, you're walking the journey with people in critical moments of their lives. And you know part of that story. You will never know all of that story. And that impacts how you show up today. That impacts how empathetic or compassionate you're able to be. That impacts how much you're willing to open up your heart, how strong you're able to be. So when we talk about being trauma informed, this is the 3 E's definition of what is trauma. Trauma, first and foremost, is an event. It's something that happens to a person, but it's not just an event. That event could be something like abuse or neglect. That event could be a significant illness of a loved one, of a small, vulnerable little baby, or the death of a loved one. But that event could be the death of your goldfish. It's whatever impacts you. It's any event that is experienced as threatening, as life-threatening, threatening to my safety. It overwhelms my ability to cope. And for some of us, my ability to cope on a Monday morning, when I'm coming in well rested after a beautiful weekend, my ability to cope might be really big. So I can handle a whole lot. On a Friday afternoon, when I'm phoning it in, I got running on fumes, and I only got 2 more hours left in my workday, my ability to cope might be a lot smaller. So my boss comes in and says, we need to have a chat, John, about whether you're going to work here anymore. Monday morning, I'd be able to go back in and I'd be able to justify myself and say, let's have a conversation about that. On Friday afternoon, start writing my resume, looking for want ads. It's any event that overwhelms your ability to cope. And of course, some people inherently have bigger coping skills, bigger sets of coping skills and smaller sets of coping skills. Any event that's experienced as being overwhelming, and that's in the eye of the beholder. It's not how scary anyone else feels like that event was. It's about how scary, how overwhelming that individual feels like it was. Okay. I think about airplane turbulence. Some people can go through the same exact event on an airplane, and some people are like, when's my next vacation? And other people are like, I'm never flying again. It's about the perception of danger. And then there are adverse effects. It affects my ability to function at home, at work, at school, in my family life, in my social life, in my health. And that's what we get to see. I get to see someone's behavior. I get to see someone on their phone not paying attention without knowing the story. Any event that's experienced as being overwhelming, life-threatening, and then has adverse effects, the behavior that we get to see. How many of you would like to live in a stress-free world? I'd like a bus pass. I'd like a bus pass to a stress-free world. But if you lived in a stress-free world, you would not grow as a person. Because we grow through experiences that are predictable, manageable, and controllable. What we call positive stress. I don't go to the gym and pick up a 2-pound weight and lift it 3 times and then put it down and pretend like that's going to make me stronger and go home. I don't get on the treadmill and crank it up to a giant 1 and walk on it for 90 seconds. We need to experience things that are predictable, manageable, and controllable. The counterpart to that is toxic stress, things that are unpredictable, unmanageable, and uncontrollable. I think about early COVID. First 6-9 months of COVID, I'm the primary grocery getter and food preparer for my household. Every time I went to the grocery store, my perception, trauma's in the eye of the beholder, my perception was that I was going to bring back potentially a deadly disease to my family and we were all going to die. What do you think I was doing with my groceries when I got them home? Cleaning them, wiping them down, trying to disinfect them. Anything that didn't need to go in the fridge went in some magical holding space for 3 days because the fomites, the surface germs, so that they disappeared. No idea. No idea if that did a bit of good to keep me and my family safe. What it did was create a little more predictable, manageable, and controllable experience for me. So in your different roles here at the Virginia Birth Injury Fund, as much as we can, when we're having consumer client, what do we call them here? Clients, consumers, families? Families. When we're having family interactions, we want to make the experience as predictable, manageable, and controllable as possible. Because there's a lot in their world that's living over here, right? There might be a lot in our world that's living over here too. But as much as we can, we want to move things predictable, manageable, and controllable. What I say to my school staff oftentimes is the first time a kid hears your voice on the playground should never be "it's time to go," because that's not creating a predictable experience. It should be we got 10 minutes left, we got 5 minutes left. Helping move things in this direction as much as we possibly can. So we talked about that 3 E's definition of trauma. This is the 4 R's definition of a trauma-informed approach. Realize the widespread impact of trauma. We're going to get to that today. Recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma when they're around us. Again, not as a counselor or therapist and not diagnosing anybody, but as we go through our experience today, tell me your first name. Sorry, Tammy. If we go through our experience today, and I'm a walker, as you can see, and maybe I stand over here at some point, and I notice that Tammy kind of recoils a little bit, and Tammy kind of turns her chair away from me a little bit, or maybe Tammy gets up and walks out. I can understand that maybe something happened there, and maybe I did something that made Tammy feel unsafe for whatever reason. I hope I didn't. But looking for signs and symptoms of what's going on so that then I can respond. Because step 3 is where the real work happens, where we change our policies, procedures, and practices to be trauma informed. And you still have your requirements and your duties and all those sorts of things. But this is where we bring the humanity into it to understand that a lot of times that's going to build in more efficiencies in what you're doing. It's going to make things be better, not worse, putting in a little bit extra work on the front end. And then lastly, working to resist re-traumatizing individuals as much as we can. I'm going to give another school example. If in an elementary school, those of you who are parents or those of you who've ever attended elementary school, what might the cafeteria worker do to get the attention of all these loud, boisterous kids to get them to be quiet? Count down backwards. What else? Turn the lights off. I think I heard yell. Whistle. Clap. I've seen cafeteria workers with a tray and a spoon. Bang, 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 bang. If I'm a kid who's in that elementary school cafeteria and I've had bad things happen, how likely is it that those bad things are around yelling and hollering? How likely is it that those bad things are around loud banging noises and sounds? How likely is it that those bad things happened in the dark? It takes less than a quarter of a second for those lights to go off, for my downstairs brain to get activated. My survival brain takes less than a quarter of a second for that survival brain to say dark equals danger, because that's my past experiences, what the world's been like. Dark equals danger. Less than a quarter of a second for my downstairs brain to send a signal through what's called my HPA axis, my hippocampus pituitary adrenal gland axis, starts pouring cortisol and adrenaline into my bloodstream, which is going to be circulated around in my body, makes my heart rate go faster, makes my lungs dilate, which gives me more energy to fight or to run. Starts taking stored sugar in the form of fat in my gut, particularly on top of my liver, starts metabolizing it into glucose, into sugar, like drinking a Kool-Aid, pouring it into my bloodstream so I'll have more energy to fight or to run. Less than a quarter of a second. When people get triggered, they go to that state of not feeling safe, and it might take me hours to flush that out of my bloodstream.
It kind of reminded me when I first got here, and I saw that our email, when we send families emails, like Alan at birthinjury.com.
Yep.
Why are we emailing them with the word birth injury there to remind them of the worst, probably the worst day of their life?
Right.
And it seems like that's a trauma-informed thing we could do by changing the name of our email.
Yeah.
So that's not what they're reading.
Yeah. And that's that policies, procedures, and practices. That's looking at what we do in terms of simple things. It doesn't mean that we're writing them twice as many checks or, but that's a simple thing to do. Change the URL of the organization. So in my world, a trauma-informed world, one of the phrases that we use a lot is that we need to respond to the need that's behind behavior. What's the need behind behavior? Because when we don't respond to the need that's behind behavior, then we don't get good results. If I go to the corner 7-Eleven and I pull out a gun and I say, give me all your money, and then I get caught, I get put in jail or prison for however long you get put in for armed robbery, and then I get out. What's the likelihood that I'm going to return to society being a more fine, upstanding, trustworthy citizen in the community? Pretty low, if we've done nothing to deal with why I was doing that in the first place. School suspension is a great example of that too. We put a kid out for fighting for 7 days, do nothing to give that kid anger management skills to be able to manage their behavior. And what's the likelihood that they're going to come back with better behavior? Very little. Responding to the need that's behind behavior is going to get us better behavior. Again, you're not counselors or therapists, but in the context of working with the families to show that compassion and empathy, to say some kind words, to be able to provide them that calm, safe, predictable environment as much as we can, responding to those needs, which might mean listening to a little bit of a story, which might get things to be more efficient later on. Sometimes when we're working with people, you got somebody on the phone, they're asking for their money, whatever, they're not listening to you. Sometimes it's easy to ask this question, what's wrong with you? Right? Hopefully not. But sometimes it may be just in our heads. But, what's wrong with you? Why can't you behave? Why can't you let us get through this conversation? The what's wrong with you question is a kind of medical question. It's looking for a problem so we can find a solution. People are not problems. What we want to do is look at this from a human perspective and ask what happened to you. A lot of times you know a lot of this story. What happened and how can I help? Trauma is not an excuse for behavior. Not at all. Somebody's yelling at you on the phone. That doesn't mean that they get away with yelling at you on the phone and being rude and belligerent and profane. Trauma is an explanation for behavior. And if we understand that, if we look through that trauma-informed lens at the behavior that somebody's given me, and I ask the question, I wonder what the story is there. That's what I'm going to ask when I stand here and Tammy, seems a little bit uncomfortable. I'm going to say, I wonder what that story is. And I could ask Tammy. Tammy has no obligation to tell me her story, right? I have no right to demand that of Tammy. But I can use that to inform how I'm going to stand and behave and act and what space I'm going to be in and not be in during the course of the hour. The most important place to ask this what happened to you question is inside of our own head. Is for me to understand that there might be a story there and use that to inform how can I help? Because I can always ask that. Would you feel more comfortable if I stayed over here? And then I can respond to that. And then it's not just not asking what's wrong with you. It is asking what's right with you. What's right with your family, your community, your environment, your world. Strength-based questions. Because there is still something going on that's good in the families that you work with who are suffering. And what we don't want to do is silver lining anything. Not good, ethical. But as much as we can, and we could get into a whole grief loss conversation, which might be the direction we go with the families, not in the grief loss directly. But what we want to do is create meaning in the face of loss. Create meaning in the face of grief. Sometimes the question I ask, I do a lot of grief loss work. Sometimes the question I ask is, what else is true? And to help somebody walk there. And that might be a perspective for you to take too sometimes. Maybe just in your own lives. So again, empathy and compassion. I'm going to pause there for a moment. Questions, thoughts? I intentionally made the screen go black for my friends online. Questions or thoughts?
I just want to get through the conversation, but to give them a moment.
Yeah.
That my agenda is not the same as theirs, and the conversation will bloom. It may not be the first time, but as you said, giving them the moment, give them empathy, and letting them have the opportunity to talk, and over time, trust will build and eventually they'll share.
Mhm.
But that human side of us makes us want to be fast and get the answers, and, you know, you're thinking of all the other things you
Right.
need to get done, but to step back.
Yeah.
And if we choose to react too fast, we could shut the conversation down completely.
Mhm. I would add in there, I love that, Tammy. I would add in there to be present. To not be 5 questions ahead,
Yeah.
but to be present in this moment.
Yes. Hard sometimes.
Yeah.
Depending on what you're bringing in yourself from the outside.
Mhm.
I try myself to check myself before I get in a conversation but it's hard sometimes.
Yeah. I've worked with a lot of people who do housing work. So they have a lot of HUD federal forms that they have to fill out with people in order to help people get to their benefits. And a lot of times those federal forms aren't very trauma informed, and they can ask very invasive questions, particularly, for example, of women. How many children do you have, and how many fathers are involved with the children that you have? And like on my best day, I might not want to answer that. But when I'm experiencing homelessness and housing crisis, you know, now you just beat me down even more. But we still have to get to those answers. Like we still have to collect that data. But how do we do that in a trauma-informed way?
I think I like that slide about the policies to reduce the stress. And I think that, like what you were just saying about the questions you're asking, I think we need to review all our policies, whether they're trauma informed, because what I see and what families see when I talk to them is it sure sounds like you're monitoring me.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not monitoring them.
Mhm.
We're not. They're responsible for their child. We're not responsible for their child. But it comes across like that, I think, to
Yeah.
families.
That we have control.
That we have control. Really, we're just trying to get information so we can pay them or ensure things are accurate. But if you get down to it, you know, it's like, sometimes it seems like it's overkill.
Yeah. And what could we do on the front end at the beginning of conversations to inform them of, you know, it's your job to take care of your kid, and we want to support you in doing that in any way that's within our power to do. We want to support you in doing that, but you're the parent and we respect that. You know, that's 20 seconds.
I also think engaging the families by letting them be involved in developing our process is going to be a game changer.
Yeah.
When we do this, because they get an opportunity at a time when they're just giving feedback to really delve into it and say, this question just seems like you got your thumb on me, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, nothing about us without us. Like we need to have people in the room who have walked through, as from the consumer family perspective, to be able to inform the process. Because despite all the experience, months, days, years of experience that are in this room, you haven't walked through it, I'm going to assume, from the family side. And how much that voice could inform the process. Most definitely. And that is very in tune with trauma-informed care. We're not going to talk about it today, but next week we'll talk about the principles of trauma-informed approach. And one of them is a collaboration and mutuality. One of them is voice and choice, where we allow people to, as much as we can, have that voice and choice, and bringing in that consumer representation.
It seems like there'd be something great about it. How do you work with someone when you have to give them information that is not what they want? Like almost like sometimes we have to say no just because the rules don't allow us to say yes. And I think that's where we struggle the most, because we want to say yes.
Right.
We may even sound like we're making commitments before we get to that final thing, because you want to meet them and solve their problems.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah. How do we empathetically say no? But in doing that, I can still join with the client, with the family, and say, I know this is hard for you. You know, right now, that's not an option. Sorry about that. You know, let's talk about how else we can work together. What else I can do to support you.
The Alan's point here, as well as to some re-traumatization. I think what here specifically is that no one chooses to be.
Mhm.
We're all pushed here without agency in decision-making process. Chooses to have a child at birth. As a result, I think even small or perceived loss of agency from the families can end up re-traumatizing them.
Right.
Because I just want to get what I need, just want them to and they don't, they feel like their hands are tied, they don't have that aspect. They don't have that agency. Something we're making now will help with that. You have to look at that from a place of their greatest trauma in life largely surrounds loss of agency in their own. Because the other thing is, it's not just the birth they didn't have a choice in. Care for a lot of these children and these families is, it takes a lot from them.
Yeah.
So there's a loss of agency, not only from the birth, but also from what their lives look like.
And I think that trauma continues because even though that happened that day, next thing they're quitting their job and doing a job where they can be home all the time, and that's traumatic. And then just every step from then on,
It's all because it's like,
it's all that first thing, but all we're thinking about is they had a child with a disability. But they've given up their career choices, their lives, their professional development. And I think that will help us make better decisions. Also be understanding that their lives are never going to be what they expect it to be. It's going to be different. And some of them will think I've talked to a lot of families that have gone through this, that they would never change anything about what happened. But still, we got to understand that they are experiencing trauma every day.
Yeah. I like you bringing the word agency in, and so maybe the challenge when we're looking at policies, procedures, and practices is how can we infuse every part of the process with empowering the families, even when that's telling them no, but still leaning into that empowerment to help them find agency, because that is probably what the biggest commonality of the families that you work with is being robbed of that empowerment, robbed of that agency.
Give people easier time processing the no.
Yeah.
Because they understand that they could have it. They did all.
And I think the other thing is we got to be careful pointing to someone else the reason it's no, like our lawyer said no, or I mean, it's easy to do something like that. And I did this the other day. We'd fail an audit if we did that. That was the wrong thing to say. I knew it right after I said it. And it really wasn't the issue. But we got to be careful that we accept the decisions we're making and not try to divert their anger to someone else, because that's easy to do. I mean,
Yeah.
we all want to do that, right? That's kind of the natural way we do things, is there's someone above me that made that decision, and we have to own it. We have to feel comfortable where we are, or someone else should probably give that news to that person that's going to own it, because they don't want to be told, I'm just a messenger. I mean, that's a difficult thing. And I think that's why I try to be available to everyone all the time on stuff like that.
Yeah, because what that does, not only does it take away agency from the client, but it's giving away your own agency as well by saying it's the rules, it's not me. And it also says me, the family, why am I interacting with somebody who has no power?
Yeah.
If you are just a messenger, if you are just a conduit, I want to talk to somebody who actually has power to help me, because you can't help me if you don't have any power.
It's interesting. I used to have, when I was director of different agencies, we always had a deputy. And after a while, it got to me, all a deputy means is if they say no, they're going to go to me anyway. And I think that Shakespeare says, I'd rather be a squad leader in Gaul than the emperor, or than the deputy emperor. But it really is true about giving away agency.
Yeah.
And when you're in a position where you're saying, I'm just a clog in the wheel passing on information, it takes away your value to them. And I think we need to make sure that when we get to that point where we're telling them something, that the person understands all the ins and outs of it and says the same thing that the person above them would say.
Yeah.
And I think we can get there.
Yeah, that consistency.
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely, attainable in a sense where if everybody is on the same page and the families know, literally they know everything that can be done per se. So that way we won't have to go through what we previously went through, which was a lot of backlash, a lot of negative things came from these families just off of the decisions that were put out there, that we were, trying to follow the code and trying to follow all the rules. But, apparently just I would say the way that it was delivered to them, maybe that was it. But I mean, we got a lot of backlash and a lot of negative feedback, from the families. So that is crazy because they're in their own trauma, and then it's like they bring us that trauma, then we get traumatized. So the reaction is just crazy,
Right.
actually.
Right. And you bring up a good point, which we touched on earlier, is that this is not just a them thing. It is a you thing. It is the things that you're dealing with, because you deal with family and they bring you that trauma, as you said, and now you got it, but then you're going to hang up the phone with them and talk to somebody else. And you're going to need to bring that empathy and
So it
compassion
just
for the
keeps-
next
It's like a
conversation.
snowball effect,
Yeah.
because even though we're getting it, from the families, then we keep it, and then we may not be as pleasant to each other.
Yeah.
Maybe we're pushing someone else to hurry up and give us an answer, or we're emailing. It really is a snowball effect that's just everybody traumatized, actually. So it's like literally you
I
have
think
to just
it's
get.
helpful to be mindful of your stressors going on, or traumas that you had that could be like affecting you in that day. And I don't know, I think it's helpful, especially when talking to families, having the understanding that they probably don't realize that the trauma they've gone through is impacting the way they're talking, the way they're acting.
Yeah.
So I always go in with that lens of like, they're not correlating like how they're talking to you or talking to me with their trauma. Like they
Right.
typically are not.
And
It's just reacting.
It's a
Yeah.
reaction, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And we'll touch on that as we talk about brain science. And we could have a whole nother session on workforce resilience, on secondary trauma, on things like that, which we're not going to so much touch on this week or next.
Well, I was just going to mention, also knowing the bigger picture is important, because, I think about it, we have this fund with a lot of money in it, and they don't understand why they're being denied something for so little money.
Yeah.
And I think educating families and including them on the big picture is going to be real helpful. And also, I think, which is real important, and I've brought this up to the board chair, is having a legislative committee. When things are done because we have to do them and we don't think it's right, we should have a process when we go back to the legislature also
Yeah.
and change it. I feel like sometimes we're sitting back and waiting things to happen to us. And that doesn't need to be like that.
Yeah. Almost story time. What might trauma look like? All sorts of different stuff. And I'm sure that you see these in the people that you work with and the phone calls that you have. Also, depression, anxiety, aggression, obvious kind of stuff. Hyper arousal, like always looking for threats, always looking for, like, you might not think the threat's in this room, but there's some big loud noise that happens out in the hallway. And some people are going to pay attention and be much more vigilant to that than others. Anyone know people, maybe yourself, maybe not asking anybody to call themselves out, who will only sit in certain places in restaurants? Some people who would never sit here with people behind you, would never sit there by the door, not knowing what's going to come in.
It's called the Sopranos principle.
Yep. That hyper arousal, avoidance of triggers. I don't know if you know people. I know people who will drive 10 blocks out of their way to avoid that intersection, because when they get close to it, what they see in their mind's eye is that pickup truck running the red light and T-bone.
Or they won't pick up a phone if they see a certain name on it.
Sure.
It's kind of like a more normal one.
I have some emails that will sit in my inbox for like a week because I'm like, I don't want to deal with that,
Yeah.
and it's because of those triggers. So all sorts of different things. For my friends online, I am going to cut the screen again because it's story time. So good discussion. We're going to end at right around 1 o'clock and let you all get back onto your workday. But anyone heard of what's called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs? Sweet. Awesome. So for those of you who haven't, and even though for those of you who have, you might not know the story behind it. I really like this story. So in the 1980s, a physician named Vince Felitti was working in San Diego, California for Kaiser Permanente Health, working in a weight loss clinic. And this weight loss clinic was specifically focused on women, and they were helping women not just drop 10 or 15 pounds to get into their bathing suit to go walk on the beach in San Diego. This was helping people who sometimes were 100, 200, even 300 pounds overweight, putting people sometimes on all liquid diets for 12 months or more. And people made sounds like that. They did a lot of intense screening on the front end because they knew it wasn't the right choice for everybody. So they did a lot of screening people out and inviting them into other programs that had a different level of rigor. And the women who came into the program, they did a lot of intense, comprehensive work to support them, not just on prescriptions about their diet and exercise, but they did a lot of great support work to help these women lose dramatic weight. They had really great outcomes. But there was a significant number of women who would come into the program who could drop weight and then seemingly out of nowhere would start putting it back on 10, 20, 30, 40 pounds. And Dr. Felitti wanted to know why. He wanted to know what the common threads were among these women so that he could figure out how best that they could support them and help them. So he started interviewing these women. He videotaped many of the interviews with consent, and I watched them. One of the only early threads that he found, common threads among these women, was that many of them had a story of an event in the community, sometimes in the workplace, not anything dramatically inappropriate, but something like, hey, you look pretty kind of different these days. You're looking pretty good. Hey, do you want to go out on Friday night? And these women could identify that that was a precursor to them going back to their old eating habits. He didn't feel like he had enough information, but he didn't even know what else to ask. So we went to what psychologists refer to as a question bank, just a giant list of questions. And he found many of the questions on this list were questions he never would have intuitively asked. He found one in particular that really caught him off guard. It was, at what age did you become sexually active? What does that have to do with anything? The first time he asked the question, video cameras on, first time he asked the question, interestingly, he was so nervous and uncomfortable to ask this question that it came out of his mouth wrong. First time he asked the question was, at what weight did you become sexually active? The woman screws up her face like you're trying to think of something from your past. She looks up at the corner of her eye, looks right back at him, says, I guess it was about 40 pounds. It was with my dad. At this point in his career, Dr. Felitti had been a physician for 20 years, and he had only encountered one other individual that had ever reported having an experience of childhood sexual abuse. This was his second. That afternoon, he continued to interview other women who were unable to maintain that weight loss. He found his third, and his fourth, and his fifth. In the end, 55% of the women who were unable to maintain that weight loss reported experiencing childhood sexual abuse. What that doesn't say is that people who are overweight have experienced childhood sexual abuse, not at all. Flip that around. People who have unresolved childhood trauma, or trauma in general, unresolved childhood trauma is going to find a way. Okay? It's going to find a way to rear its head until we work to resolve it. And that find a way could be, because of whatever that trauma is, unresolved trauma is going to come out. That could be substance use, because I want to numb myself out and not be conscious and present. Kind of keeps the nightmares and the flashbacks from coming back. But sometimes that finding a way to cope might be somebody like me who becomes a social worker, and I get to be around helping professionals all the time, and maybe some of that help's going to rub off on me. Unresolved trauma finds a way. He took this information about all the traumas he had found in the women who were unable to maintain that weight loss, and he took it to the Center for Disease Control. In the 1990s, he and Dr. Rob Anda put together what's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. They asked 10 simple questions about experiences of childhood trauma, not about how bad it was, how long it went on, how often it happened. Just 10 questions. 3 questions about abuse, 2 questions about neglect, and 5 questions about household dysfunction. This is not all inclusive of childhood trauma. All sorts of bad things can happen. Obviously, they're outside of this. If I look at these 10 questions and I answer yes to 4 of them, then my ACE score, Adverse Childhood Experiences Study score, my ACE score would be a 4. First thing they did is they looked at the prevalence. How often do these things happen? When that woman said 40 pounds, what flicked in Dr. Felitti's brain is childhood sexual abuse is super rare. 21% in the original study, 1 out of every 5 people. We just weren't asking the questions before this. That's the first big revolutionary element of this study. They took their numbers to the leadership at the Center for Disease Control for an early review. Leadership at the CDC pushed the entire study back to them and said, your data's wrong. There's no way this is true. 12.5% of the general population have an ACE score of at least 1. I'm sorry, 64% of the general population, 2 out of every 3 people have an ACE score of at least 1. 12.5% have an ACE score of 4. That was mind-blowing in the first place. But then they looked at lifetime health outcomes. If I have an ACE score of 4 compared to having an ACE score of 0, I'm 7 times more likely to be an alcoholic. 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. 11 times more likely in my old age to develop Alzheimer's or dementia. If I have an ACE score of 4 compared to an ACE score of 0, I'm 21% more likely to live in poverty. 27% more likely to never graduate college. 39% more likely to be unemployed. And in my demographic, if I have an ACE score of a 6 compared to my demographic with an ACE score of a 0, 20 years shorter lifespan. Doing a great job of depressing y'all, right? Mm-hmm. So what's important to remember, an ACE score does not create destiny. The experience of childhood trauma does not create destiny, because all it is a list of events. Remember, we had events experienced and then effects. All it is a list of events. What's predictable is preventable. An ACE score does not create destiny. Childhood trauma does not create destiny. Trauma itself doesn't create destiny. What the ACE study did is it helped really elevate the fact that if we don't do anything about these bad things, then bad outcomes result. That 20-year life expectancy gap here in our city of Richmond, Westover Hills, 83 years life expectancy. Gilpin Court, 63 years. 5-mile drive, 20-year life expectancy gap. As we have higher loads of trauma, we have worse lifetime health outcomes. Everything up here. It makes sense that if I have a rough childhood, then I'm going to grow up, I might be a smoker or a drinker, use some drugs, and that might impact my heart health and my lung health and my liver health. That might make you die early. That makes sense. It impacts cancer, liver disease, lung disease, heart disease, tuberculosis, unintended pregnancies, early initiation of substance use, alcohol use, tobacco use, everything up here. Higher loads of trauma, ophthalmological problems, dermatological problems, orthopedic problems. Worse outcomes unless we do something about it. So I told you I don't like doing 1-hour presentations because I do a great job of depressing everybody. I want to leave you with a little bit of a insightful thought that you can think about and noodle on, and we'll pick up with it when we get back together the next time. I'm going to invite you, if you're willing to hold up your hand like this. This is your brain. We're going to construct your brain, and then we'll follow up with it from a trauma-informed perspective next time. Down here, we have your brain stem. Brain stem controls your autonomic nervous system, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your circulation, all the things that automatically happen in your body and you don't have to think about or consciously engage in. Anybody want to guess what lives down here in your autonomic nervous system, but you can consciously control? Breathing, exactly. Which is why breathing does such a great innate natural way of helping you regulate. Because I don't have to think about breathing, but I can be intentional about my breathing and why it interacts with our body in a much different way than more conscious kind of things. Take your thumb here, wrap it into your palm. Your thumb here is what we're going to call your downstairs brain. Downstairs brain is where your survival instinct is. Survival instinct, fight, flight, and freeze live down here in your survival instinct. Also, a primitive level of sensory input lives down here, which is why a lot of times when we're in a moment of trauma and survival instinct, we end up getting, that gets paired with some sort of sensory experience, like a sound or a smell. Take your fingers here, wrap them over your thumb. My fingers here are my upstairs brain. Upstairs brain is where my relationship building and my problem solving, my delayed gratification, being able to think about consequences, and learning are all here in my upstairs brain. Upstairs brain is a container for this downstairs brain. Downstairs brain doesn't get to do anything without going through the upstairs brain. Sometimes we call the downstairs brain, your survival instinct, your barking dog. If I'm in a house and I got a dog and my dog's looking out the front window and sees somebody walking up the front steps, my dog might start barking and say, "Hey, Dad, pay attention. There's danger, might be coming up the front steps." My upstairs brain as a container can do some problem solving and look out the window and see the Amazon truck and the blue smock and package in his hand. And I know I'm expecting something today. And I can quiet that barking dog. In moments of survival, we flip our lid. The impact of that event results in us flipping our lid. And when I flip my lid, my downstairs brain becomes in charge. And that's important. That's a really good thing. Nadine Burke Harris has one of the most popular TED Talks on trauma on YouTube. And one of the things she says in her TED Talk is when when a bear is coming to attack me in the woods, I don't want to be in relationship building brain. I want to flip my lid and rally those resources to fight or to run. We need to be able to do that. But when we flip our lid, then I lose the ability to engage in relationship building. I lose the ability to think about consequences. Think about how many people who are incarcerated today did what they did when they weren't thinking about consequences. When I flip my lid, I literally, tomorrow does not exist. I cannot see to tomorrow. Those of you who are parents, think about how many times you've had an argument with your kid when they're like this and you're trying to justify, you need to behave better or you're going to be grounded this weekend. You need to behave better or I'm going to take away your PlayStation. Literally, that doesn't exist if I'm really in that flip lid state. One of the things when we engage with relationship building, with empathy and compassion, with those soft skills that we were talking about how we deliver bad news, things like that. One of the things we can do is help get that upstairs brain back online and help keep that upstairs brain back online. And one of the things we need to do is realize who we're talking to. Am I talking to this or am I talking to this? Because there's a very different way of interacting with somebody when they're like this, when I need to focus on de-escalation, as opposed to this. Because I can't explain anything to you when you're like this. So as you go into the next week until we get together again, think about that. Think about who you're interacting with at any given time. And again, take this home. This might be you and your family too. Think about who you're interacting with. Think about when you're like this, when you get into that big heated argument with that husband that sometimes, I mean, he's not always perfect. Think about that. Think about times when you see that lid flip and think about what characteristics, and that could be in real life. That could be on a TV show you're watching or a movie or something like that. But think about that and digest a little bit of what we've talked about. And we will end on a much more resilient note next time. But I wanted to give you something to think about as we go.
Just wanted to say something.
Yeah, please.
First of all, thanks for doing this for us. This is great.
You're welcome.
I think it's exactly what we wanted.
Yep.
And I really want staff to understand this is probably the most important thing, our foundation, as we move forward and try to really figure out how we can. So again, I appreciate it. We're going to be asking for more of this.
Good.
The families are going to really enjoy this and maybe get some insights. And I think it'll help us work together.
Good.
So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you all. Thank you all for the work that you're doing. You're walking with families in real critical moments of their lives, and you're willing to do it and support them financially and otherwise. So you're welcome. You're welcome.